Hi, everybody. This is Warren Herman, and we're going to just kind of throw some weird ideas out here. And we're going to kind of explain some things that I think will be helpful in thinking about the nature of physical reality. This is kind of a different kind of a video subject for me, but I'm going to root it in a very interesting philosophical problem. So, for example, I'm going to use this object here. We're going to talk about a philosophical problem in Buddhist philosophy, which also affects philosophy in general. So we're going to actually approach this by looking at this Lego object. So by looking at these Legos here, we're going to think about the nature of how things in the universe work. So as you can see, this Lego object is made up of different parts. And if I kind of break some parts off, we can find that there's no, if we call this thing a spaceship, there's no spaceship if we break up the parts. Where is the spaceship? Is there a spaceship there at all? This is essentially the Buddhist approach to reality. By looking at they would kind of say, okay, well, where is the spaceship inside of this spaceship figurine? Well, if you break it apart and analyze it, there is no spaceship. We could just take the pieces apart, and there's nothing spaceship about any of the individual pieces. So therefore, there's no spaceship in the spaceship. Therefore, there's just emptiness. There's nothing. And this is the way that Buddhism explains its understanding of no self, in a way, and that things dependently co-originate. So there's no created spaceship. The spaceship has no creator. There's just nothing. There's only these little parts make the spaceship. They cause the spaceship to appear to exist, and there's nothing through dependent co-origination. There's this kind of little bits and pieces make it seem like there's a spaceship there, but we have to see through that and therefore achieve liberation. That's a very simplified understanding of some Buddhist thought. So, and this is how Buddhism aims to free us from suffering, to see that what we're thinking is a problem, we just kind of divide and conquer, so to speak. We kind of look and realize that it's not what it seems. We see through it, and we get free. That's Buddhism. Now, the problem in Buddhist cosmology is very similar to a problem that is happening in mainstream cosmology, which is the conflict, and I don't understand these things, so I'm just proposing a strange understanding, which I actually believe may have some bearing on the subject. And some bearing on this subject, I think can be found in an analogy to linguistics, and this will make much more sense in a few moments. So I'm going to take here is a card from a game here. It says Uno, and if I say this word Uno, meaning one, that means something. But if I just give you the letter U, what does that mean? The meaning of that is uncertain. The meaning of that is pretty much nothing. So if I deconstruct the word uno, just like I break apart the spaceship, we get to meaninglessness, emptiness, so to speak, just in the same exact way. Just like the spaceship is a physical word, so to speak, a whole that is communicated through parts, so too is the word uno communicated as a whole through the parts, which are letters. So this is a whole made up of blocks. This is a whole made up of letters. And if I deconstruct them, there's an uncertainty and an emptiness. In the same way, in physics, there is this paradox between the things that things apparently seem solid, but physics tells us they're empty, that they're mostly empty space. There's also a paradox between the type of physics that's used for large things, and I'm going to get this wrong, but like the big model physics, like the Newtonian physics that's used for like large objects and how they interact, and the quantum physics for how things work inside of an atom. And so I believe that actually a very fascinating solution is found to this when we realize that maybe what we were looking at is that objects are information. So that maybe objects are words. Maybe the reason why we can obviously see, okay, here is a person, and if you divide me up into molecules, there's not a person, is not so much because there's no person to begin with, but because the person is a piece of information, just like a word, just like a model of a spaceship. So maybe I am a word being said. Maybe you are looking at something that is being spoken to you by somebody, to someone else. Maybe the universe is like a piece of dialogue. And the word dialogue, it's like there's root words in there, which I'm sure that second part is the dialogue, which is logos. Like, there's probably some element there of that word, some root word there. They may correct me with etymology, but in any case, what I'm saying here is that we hear in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And and we hear these descriptions of the wisdom of God, even in the Book of Wisdom, that through wisdom everything was made. There's kind of these allusions to this weird way in which everything is kind of made through the Word, and in a way in which everything. There's some traditional Christian teaching on how everything. There's the logos, which is Christ, and the logoi, which are like little. Everything else is all the other words. And I think that's something very interesting about this cosmology, which we actually amazingly find in an unexpected place. Because, in modern thought, Genesis is not exactly regarded as a place of great philosophical insight in the modern outside world. We see this way in which God speaks things into existence, and Adam names creatures, for example. There's this thing of like words having some type of significance. And I think that's something that's interesting here is I believe that in this strange source, we can actually find some type of a resolution to this Buddhist problem and the modern cosmological problem of the issue between the Newtonian paradigm and the quantum paradigm. And I believe it's basically built on the fact that the problem is that we're looking at words that we're breaking down into letters and wondering why there's uncertainty about what things mean when we break them down, because we're not realizing that objects are information that is spoken to us, or like that everything is like a model of a spaceship. We're not realizing that there is like that everything is a dialogue between the divine, between God and us, and minds are being spoken. Minds are talking to each other. So there's not a primacy of mind. And I think it also comes to the fact that modern cosmology is bottom up, not top down. So we're expecting that everything is coming out of physiological processes. So for example, that life comes out of a cosmic soup, that the Big Bang happens out of a frothy medium of fluctuating quantum fields. We're expecting soup to give rise to these things rather than mind. And so because we are looking at something which people have described it almost like looking at pixels, or we're looking at something that's like language, that breaks down in the same way that language is. And so I think that's the problem, is that we are thinking about everything bottom up rather than top down. So if everything is like a something that's written, like the word uno doesn't come into being, so to speak, from the random arrangement of letters, but by the imposition of a mind which had an intention in saying something. And if I break down the message and chop it up, of course I'm going to have uncertainty. Of course I'm going to have emptiness, because the message was meant to be whole. And so I think that is what we're seeing in the problem of modern physics. And that we can actually, I think that this is also what St. Thomas Aquinas's understanding of I don't understand these things very well, because I've tried to understand them. But like St. Thomas, I believe G.K. Chesterton in his book about St. Thomas talks about, there's almost this way in which things, like the chair participates in the universal idea of the chair. There's a way in which, or I might say there's a way in which chair is being said by all the chairs, in a sense. So it's like, there's this way in which things really mean something. Things really are themselves, because mind is primary and information is what objects are ultimately. And I think that this explains in a way, like the fact that reality is information and that everything is a word spoken between people and from God to people in a dialogue. This explains the way in which the physics are showing that there is this way in which this Newtonian paradigm is broadly existing, for large objects and the quantum paradigm for small objects. All this is saying is that things are words, not that there's two separate theories. Because in the same way, that's where we're saying this is a spaceship and it's made out of blocks, and this is the word uno and it's made out of letters, and letters don't have meaning and are uncertain as to their meaning, and blocks don't have meaning and are uncertain as to their meaning if we break it apart. And so that's the same thing. That's the same thing. The Newtonian is the whole, and the quantum is the broken down parts. It's just language. It's that everything is language, and that kind of goes back to this kind of logos type cosmology, which we find things being spoken into being in Genesis. And so that's what I'm talking about here as a weird way of thinking about physics and about philosophical problems, even in Buddhism. So hopefully this has been an interesting exploration of ideas.